it is already December. I know I say this every single month, every single monthly report that I do where I wrap up all the literature and films that I watched and read. I always say, can you believe it's already insert month? But it's December, and that has a lot more substance to it, doesn't it? That has a lot more grounds. This is the last wrap-up report that I will do for the year. Isn't that terrifying and wonderful? Oh, the passage of time never ceases to make me feel awfully unwell. The books, by the way, and we have films as well. This month of reading is interesting. We have some fiction, finally, some short stories. We have some old stuff and some new stuff, and the films are interesting as well because I had a 24-hour flight and spent most of the flight watching films, so we have a nice big dump for you for this final month of December. This is a whole year of me every single month reporting to you and reviewing and discussing every single book I read and film I watched, which I'm glad that I did, because now I get to go through it all, every single book I read and film I watched in the entire year, to make a video about all of my favourites. But that's gonna come later because I still need to sit with that for a bit and process all of it. This is a big task. It's always tricky and wonderful going through my yearly watches and reads to try and deduce, not the best ones, but my favourite ones, my personal preferences. This is tricky because I have always been a very coordinated chaos. I'm not gonna say chronically chaotic. I'd say chronically coordinated chaos, some kind of. I don't record things. I don't really do that. I don't really have a means or a method to my madness. There's just madness. And when I finish a book, I'll try and stack it up in order of when I read it, and if I like the book, I'll judge that, I'll deduce that by how much I've annotated the book. Not very methodical. I've spoken to some friends who do what I do and they all think I'm mad because, you know, our job is to record and review books and films, and I have no recording method whatsoever. I just go with the flow, but I think it makes it more fun and candid, but I'm wrong. It's just bad and not good for me. And so these past few months I have been trialing a system, you see. The method to my madness is now officially Notion. And I'd like to thank Notion for ever so kindly sponsoring this video today. Notion is an easy to use platform to help bring your goals into actuality, personalised to how you think and plan and work best. Think of it as your second brain. I've been using Notion for several things, such as weekly to-do lists and little notes and bits and bobs and project tidbits all in one place. But I have been specifically focusing a lot more on recording all the books that I read and films that I watch in this kind of system graph thing. It's a huge help capturing those instant thoughts the second that I finish a book or hit credits on a film, because usually I kind of just sit with it and let it fester for too long and forget about it, or I write down my thoughts in a journal then forget that I wrote it down, and it's this whole thing. So now I have somewhere to direct myself to, and it's very helpful. What's more is in the new year you can now create your own custom portrait with Notion faces. Bring your best ideas, boldest resolutions, and now a custom self-portrait to life in Notion, the workspace shaped by you. It's all hand-drawn by Notion's original illustrator, and the combinations are endless. Switch up your profile picture and stand out in your workspace or wherever you connect, and for those times when you can't bear another Zoom meeting, your Notion face is there. So new year, new you, right? That's what we say, isn't it? If you want to streamline your reading lists or catalogue your film journeys or just attempt to get an overall grip on your life, like somebody else I know, you can get started for free via the link in my description box, and don't forget to make your own Notion face when it launches on January 7th. Now I suppose you want to know what books I've read this month in December, the final month of the year. We get it, I know we get it, but I'm not going to stop saying it because it's pervasively shocking to me. The first book that I read this month was Andre Breton's Mad Love. And I read this because I love Andre Breton's Nadia. It's one of my favourite books of all time in the whole entire world, one of my top 5 I'd say. Context, Andre Breton is the father of Surrealism, an art movement in which I very much love and adore and am fascinated by, and if you have been around here for a while, you know that I won't shut up about it, and I'm very sorry about that. The core idea of this is that Breton explores mad love, which is a form of love that transcends rationality and kind of elevates the imagination. He sees it as the ultimate path to freedom and creativity, which kind of seals these surrealist ideals. It's a mixture of poetry, prose, and autobiographical ramblings, which is really interesting, so it kind of deterred a lot and ventured away from Nadia in that respect. There's lots of philosophical discussions and ramblings and musings and sweet nothings in this book, as there would be, as it's Andre Breton, and he does love himself a lot. You can tell by his writing that he loves himself a lot, which I like. I like a confident writer. Sue me. I think that's a great trait to have. I think that this book specifically is more about, less about clarity and more about chaos, more about kind of just putting everything on the page and putting all these ideas into one, and this kind of, that's a piece of art in itself, the chaos of this book, which made it quite inherently hard to follow at points, but it does kind of circle back on itself, whereas Nadja was more of a kind of like a structured plot situation, so it did differ in that regard. I don't know why I'm using this as a comparative essay, but I am, because I love Nadja so much and I read this expecting to love it. I didn't adore this. That's what I'm trying to say. I appreciated it, and there are some wonderful lines in here that were kind of also in Nadja, that were kind of repeated a bit, but I like that it's consistent. Anyway, this is Andre Breton, Mad Love. Not a simple read. I wouldn't recommend if you've not read any of his other works or are familiar with surrealism, but if you're into this whole world like me, it's a must read. It's Andre Breton, baby. The next book that I read was The World and Other Places by Jeanette Winterson. I adore Jeanette Winterson. If you watch all these videos, you'll know that. I absolutely am in love with Jeanette Winterson. I think she's incredible. When I went to Hay Festival earlier in the year, she was there also. Got to pick her brain. What's more than that is that there was a photographer taking pictures of all the artists and speakers, and they took mine and they took hers, and they put our pictures next to each other. There is a post where it is a portrait of me next to Jeanette Winterson, and it says, "Artist at Hay Festival." I've made it, mum. That was surreal. Anyway, this is The World and Other Places by Jeanette Winterson. It's a collection of short stories. This is an older one. This one's from 1998, I believe. And you can kind of tell by a lot of things that are said that are very outdated and problematic now. But it's a product of its culture and its time, and obviously, you know, that whole thing, separate cultural context, separate era and societal developments and advances. I don't usually read short story collections unless it's Jeanette Winterson these days. I used to love them. I've got a lot of recommendations for you for short story collections from back in the day when I used to read them, but now I just don't. I just don't, because if I'm reading a book, I like to commit to it and fall into the world. But I read Jeanette Winterson's because they're magical. This is not my favourite short story collection of hers, but she can do no wrong in my eyes. In her first collection of short stories, Winterson reveals all the facets of her extraordinary imagination. There are worlds that are once familiar and yet shockingly strange. I found this to be a lot more surreal than her other works. Her other works tend to be more life-based and kind of hyper-real almost, but this one was very surreal. My favourite work of hers, in case you're interested, is Written on the Body and also Art and Lies. They're both brilliant. Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit is good, it's brilliant also, but the other two just really took me by, they just pulled me in and I couldn't get out of them. Her prose is like poetry. I think that's all I should say to convince you to read. The next book that I read was a reread, and that is Charles Bukowski's Notes of a Dirty Old Man. I talk about Bukowski a lot because I read Bukowski a lot. I've always been a Bukowski avid reader. I think his poetry, whilst it is hit or miss and some mean absolutely nothing, the ones that hit so hard that I see stars. And I think I read a lot of Bukowski's poetry at a very formative age when it came to developing my own taste and opinions and ideals surrounding literature, and I like that he writes a lot about writing, and as a writer myself that really resonates, so I do connect with Bukowski's writing a lot, and that's not gonna be for everybody. It's not for everybody. A lot of people despise this man. This is a collection of Bukowski's columns for an underground LA newspaper. It's kind of gritty realism. He writes as himself, which is his alter ego, this kind of Henry Chinaski. It dives into America's low life to eulogize life's losers and anti-heroes packed with violence, women, gambling and booze. It's semi-autobiographical, veer between hilarity and despair. It's kind of about the beauty and futility of life. I'm paraphrasing from the blurb and mixing in my own kind of interpretation as we go, by the way. I prefer his poetry a lot more than I prefer his novels and his columns and that kind of thing. I think Bukowski is best as a man of few words, because when he has the chance to fill a page, he will fill the page with absolute garbage. And I say that respectfully. That's obviously what he wants to do and it works for him. It's very intentional. But when he has to kind of abide by this strict, rigid stanza situation of poetry, I find that the words that he uses, they're so simplistic and blunt and to the point and direct and concise, but also magical and beautiful and real, and that's what I like about his poetry. Anyway, that was a reread of this. I don't love this book. I think I reread it because I bought a tote bag and that came free with it, and I thought, cool, I've got 2 copies of this now, I guess I have to read the other one. The final 2 books of this month. I am filming this a little bit before the month ends, and I'm reading 2 books right now, and because I'm currently home in Australia for Christmas, I know I will finish these because I'm about to go lay on the beach and just read. And so I'm telling you about these, but I'm not going to tell you my full thoughts, but I will be able to tell you about my full thoughts when I finish them. The first is The Glutton by A.K. Blakemore, and the second is Growing Up, Sex in the 1960s by Peter Doggett. And this one is fiction, and I think I've spoken about this before in a haul that I did, and I've been meaning to read this for so long. The 18th century is drawing to a close, and unrest grips France. Tarare has been born into a life of slender means, but when a sudden act of violence ignites in him a ferocious appetite, his extraordinary abilities to eat make him a marvel throughout the land. Travelling to Paris and beyond, through the heart of the revolution, he journeys into a world of upheaval and depravity, in which the hunger of one peasant is matched only by the insatiable demands of the people of France. This is meant to be quite perverted and messed up and beautiful and all of those things that I really adore. I'm not too far into it, so I can't give you too much of my analysis just yet. The prose is unique, and I'm really digging it. I'm really digging the prose. Why did I word it like that? But that's this, and I'm prioritizing reading this over this one because I'm quite engulfed in it actually. I'm not far into it, like I said, but I found it hard to put it down. I had to put it down because big sister duties. The next book is this one here. This is non-fiction. I got this as research for my novel and never really read it, but now that I'm in Australia and kind of rooting myself in place and time and feeling all these present feelings and everything, I'm kind of circling back to the novel and polishing up these things that are set in place. I'm wording this so carefully so as to not give spoilers, and this is suddenly relevant again. So I'm reading this. I'm also fascinated in the 60s in general because I just think everyone is. Who isn't? It's a fascinating era. It's incredible and it means so much to me. And because my novel's set in the late 60s, I've done so much research about the 60s, and now I'm just unfortunately a big walking encyclopedia on the late 60s. And I don't want to be, but I am. It was really bad. It was very bad when I was going through the research spiral for the novel. It was all I'd talk about. I was the worst person ever to hang out with because I'd just be spitting facts about the 60s at dinner. Somebody would take me out for drinks and I'd just say, do you know that in 1967, la 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 la. This is about the celebrated and vilified 1960s and the heart of the controversy, the music, drugs, fashion, hopes, dreams, political movements, and sex, obviously. That was kind of the core of it, the sexual liberation of the 1960s and what it was like living through this and growing up through this pivotal era of societal development and something that will never ever ever come back from. So that's this. And now I suppose you want to hear about some films. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 films. 9 films so far in December. The first film that I watched was, oh, this is exciting. The first film that I watched was Nosferatu. On the 4th of December, I was sent to the premiere in London. And it was very wonderful, and I'm very grateful for that. And the whole cast was there, and the director was there, and I am a Robert Eggers fangirl because I love the way that he respects folk horror. He doesn't make it gimmicky and kind of see this easy, sellable, ultra-commercial plot. He sees this thing that he respects deeply. For example, you can see it in his incredible film, The Witch, with Anya Taylor-Joy as the witch. Anyway, Nosferatu is based on Dracula, based on Bram Stoker's Dracula, and it's a vampire film, very obviously. There are multiple makes of this film. My favourite one being from the 20s, Nosferatu, the black and white silent film. I think I've said this before, but if you live in London, Prince Charles ever so frequently do a screening of this film with a live orchestra to accompany it, and that is an unmissable experience that everyone has to go to. My review for this was big day for the freaks and folk horror fanatics. Robert Eggers, you can do no wrong in my eyes, except maybe tell Lily Rose Depp to not moan like that, because I can't, no spoilers obviously, because this is coming out very soon and you'll have to go watch it, but her moaning. There's something about her moaning that you're going to watch and remember me saying this. The set design was incredible. The costuming was absolutely incredible. Also the fact that all the rats were not CGI. Robert Eggers used real rats, and there are so many rats in this film. Keep that in mind when you go watch it as well. I loved it. As a Robert Eggers folk horror Dracula fangirl, this meant a lot to me. But my friend that I went with, who is not a folk horror Robert Eggers Dracula fanboy, didn't get it, therefore didn't really like it. So, you know, do your research before you go see it. I recommend seeing the old one before you see the new one so you have something to compare it to. And then I watched, in lieu of going to Australia for Christmas, I watched Picnic at Hanging Rock, 1975. This is one of my favourite films in the whole entire world, and I think it is my most favourite Australian film, which is not that hard because Australian cinema tends to suck. That's self-derogatory, by the way. This is set at Hanging Rock in this, I think it's like the turn of the century, I believe. So it's late 1800s, I think, going to 1900, I believe. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's right. And it's this school, and these girls go to school near Hanging Rock, which is this natural rock formation, which is near where I am right now because it's near where my parents live, and so I live like a 20-minute drive from it, if that. I'm not going to specify any further, but I've been there a lot of times, kind of grew up around it, which is really cool. They go there and there's a mystery that happens and they'll go missing, and the film, it's based on a book by Joan Lindsay, which is one of my favourite books also. My favourite thing about this is that it never says directly what happens, and it's all about what didn't happen, ruling things out one by one, which leaves more to the imagination. It's also just this stellar example of Australian Gothic, which people think is not a genre, but it very much is, and I should make a whole video about this because Australian Gothic has been around for a very long time. How could it not? We're surrounded by the bush. There's not much else. The next film that I watched was Breakfast at Tiffany's, 1961. Would you believe that was my first time seeing it? I've not seen it before that. I liked it. I like her attitude. I think she's very cool. I think it was predictable, as per older films about romance tend to be. The girl always ends up with the guy who comes in at the beginning who kind of pisses her off a little bit. Very predictable, but I love the pattern of it, the consistency. It's a classic, and if you haven't seen it, I think you should see it because it's Audrey Hepburn and, dare I say, her prime. It's just this party girl who likes diamonds and Tiffany's, and she meets this quirky offbeat guy who kind of wants to help her, but she doesn't think she needs help, and it's you can imagine what happens next. The next film that I watched was Carol, 2015, obligatory yearly Christmas rewatch. And I'm glad that I did this year because last time I didn't love it. I thought that it was kind of annoying and predictable and gritty, and I think that I thought that because all my friends love it so much that I was expecting for the best film ever. But this year I watched it with zero expectations and I absolutely adored it. Fell in love with it for the first time, and it's now right up there with one of my favourites. If you haven't seen it, it's about this young woman who is in this unhappy period of her life. She doesn't really like her job or her boyfriend. She's kind of just bored, she's kind of just existing. She meets this older woman, Carol, who is going through a divorce and has this tumultuous kind of life, but she's so alluring and she's so put together and she's like this, and they kind of seduce each other and run away together, and it's about their unfolding relationship, and it's about power dynamics, and it's about Freud. Freud was right in this one, but anyway, it's a beautiful film, and it's about the things that are said just as much as it's about the things that aren't said. It's also about being queer in the 50s, when it's a time where you can't be queer. That leads on nicely into the next film that I watched, which is Queer 2024, another press screening that I was invited to. I'm very grateful for. This one was via Mubi, and we had the cast and the director there again. We had Luca, we had Daniel Craig, we had the set designer, and we had the script writer, and that was really incredible because we got to speak to them at the end and really get to know the process and the thought process, and there was an after party afterwards and everybody was kind of just like crowding around Luca Guadagnino trying to get just one word please. It was quite interesting, quite entertaining to say the least. And this film, it was a trip, an absolute trip, and I say that metaphorically and I say that literally because there is a tripping scene where it's this kind of osmosis, merging of bodies, which is my favourite topic to explore. Osmosis, I'm very obsessed with the idea of osmosis. William S. Burroughs, the author who wrote Junkie, he wrote this book called Queer, which was semi-autobiographical, but he never finished it because he killed his wife and all this stuff happened. So this is a book, and Luca Guadagnino took it and added his own ending to it, which is a very brave, bold thing to do. And he created a film out of it. Lo and behold, Queer. It's set in, I believe, New Mexico, with this queer scene of US expats who are all in this kind of scene, this underground scene together. Everyone's queer, and this main character, played by Daniel Craig, is this older guy, and he's addicted to all kinds of drugs, and he's pretty messed up. And he becomes completely obsessed and infatuated with this younger guy who's quite pure, quite virginal. He's not really in the scene, but he's around it, and he doesn't really ever divulge if he's actually queer or not, or if he's just looking for something to do. And this messes with the protagonist's head so much, because the lack of knowing this person is making him think he's falling in love with him, because he's creating all these ideas about him and he's obsessing, and it's limerence and it's infatuation, but it might be love. And there's this gorgeous osmosis scene, which I'm not going to say much about because you have to watch it, but there's this gorgeous osmosis scene where their communication is so lackluster that they just merge bodies after they do a bunch of ayahuasca. And there's this dance of these bodies as they know each other and they're speaking without speaking, and that was really magic. Really magic. Every single person in the screening was kind of just dead silent and just looking at it like, oh my goodness. It was really beautiful. It's not my favourite Luca Guadagnino film, but I am very grateful for this experience and this glimpse of intimacy and addiction and very graphic sex scenes. A friend who I was with turned to me and whispered about midpoint of the film and said, I didn't ever think I'd see James Bond doing this. Because Daniel Craig is James Bond. Anyway, the next film that I watched was The Lord of Misrule. We're now on the flight to Australia from London. The Lord of Misrule 2023. When the daughter of a town's new priest, not a priest, it's a vicar. People need to stop mixing up priest and vicar. They're very different things. I'm reading straight off the reviews here, but it's not a priest. When the daughter of the town's new vicar goes missing during the Harvest Festival, a desperate search begins, uncovering the town's dark history and resurfacing tales of a mysterious malevolent spirit that demands sacrifice. I came for the folklore because I'm going through a big folklore phase right now. I came for the folklore, and this has been compared a lot as kind of like the contemporary Wicker Man. I didn't love it. It was quite predictable, quite kitschy, gimmicky horror stuff. I don't think it respected the folklore in the sense that Robert Eggers' stuff respects folklore. I think it made it kind of this jump scary thing where people are possessed, and it's not really relevant. So the next film I watched was To Have and Have Not, 1944. I watched this on the flight as well. I watched it for Lauren Bacall, The Woman That You Are. This is a noir romance set in World War II, and that's kind of all there is to it. Like, there's subplots and everything, but this romance is everything. And as I was saying earlier, with older films, they're all very predictable, and you just know that the guy that she's with at the start, that she kind of hates, she's going to end up with. That's the very predictable thing. But I love it because you know the whole time, and you're thinking, when are they gonna fall for each other? When's it gonna happen? I will watch anything with Lauren Bacall because she is just so, the way that her presence can just command an entire room. That scene, the initial scene where we meet her character, she's just leaning against the wall, smoking a cigarette. She's got this little corset blazer on, and oh my goodness, I would fall to my knees if I saw her. The next film that I watched was 2001: A Space Odyssey, 1968, Stanley Kubrick. Can you believe it's my first time watching this film as a self-proclaimed avid film enjoyer? Me neither. But I'm glad that I waited, and I'm glad that I waited until a 24-hour flight where I had nothing else to think about or do and zero service on my phone, so I was forced to sit with it for the remaining 7 hours of the flight. I kind of think that people who pretend to understand this film from the first watch are lying. Same as Mulholland Drive by David Lynch. They're not similar in any way, shape or form, these two films, but I'm comparing them in the sense that they are very convoluted and very metaphorical, and kind of just, it feels like a bunch of nonsense until you sit with it and watch it a few more times and understand what's happening. This film is obviously about space, a space odyssey. It's predicted in the future of 2001. They thought we'd be dominating space by then, but all we had was Facebook. Did we even have Facebook then? I don't know. That's kind of before my time a little bit too. I liked the whole meta god allegory, which is at least my interpretation of it, but I know that I need to rewatch it a million, hundred thousands of times. And it's impossibly relevant right now as well, because there's this kind of artificial intelligence figure that mans the spacecraft that the astronauts are on and makes sure they're okay and if they're all up to date and tells them what to do and fixes everything, but it turns on them. Classic story of AI getting a kind of conscience and seeking vengeance on these people that it's had to serve and making them serve him. I think the visuals are absolutely stunning, the soundtrack is classic. Anyway, the final film that I watched in December, and thus 2024, is The Circus, 1928, which is Charlie Chaplin. And do you know what's magic? When a silent film from a whole century ago, 100 years ago, still has the modern girl, me, erupting into laughter in the midst of a 24-hour flight. Charlie Chaplin himself is an interesting figure, and if you want to feel a bit creeped out and grossed out and weird and awful, research him. But if you want to feel happy and laugh a lot, watch his films. It's undeniable that he was a mastermind when it came to his stuff. His character, this character that he invented, is just so hilarious and so charming and so innocent. It just made me feel really happy and at ease watching this thing that's so simplistic and has made a century of people laugh and enjoy themselves. Charlie Chaplin, if you don't know, by the way, was this guy from the 20s and 30s and, you know, kept on going, and he made a bunch of films, mostly comedies, a lot of political satires and that kind of thing as well. It feels like I've been talking for an entire year because this has been a particularly literary and filmy month to conclude the year. I'm not going to get all sentimental about this being the final video of the year because I'm going to do more next year. This is my job. Oh. I hope you enjoyed your year. Hope you enjoyed your life. As always, comment if you've seen or read anything I've talked about and have a perspective or interpretation that I should read, because I always like that. I like when I say what I've read and watched and I go through and read your own interpretations of it. Makes me realise that I'm pretty stupid. Anyway, I'm going to go. I love you. Merry Christmas and all that jazz.